Good evening. Hey, it works. All right. Before we begin, I was hoping to... Is Father Eduardo here yet? Hey, Father.
So we're going to begin in prayer. I do have a prayer here. It was not AI generated. It was generated by Archbishop Michael Miller. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. God of eternal wisdom and undying light, you have entrusted to the work of our hands the flourishing of the University of St. Thomas. Through the gift of your Spirit, enlighten us this evening, so that under your merciful guidance, we may revere the wonder of life, delight in the power of reason, and rejoice in the truth that leads to freedom. This evening, we invoke your special blessing upon our speaker, Taylor Black, and Thomas Harmon. May his words enlighten our minds and inspire our hearts. May UST remain ever faithful to its calling as a center for the pursuit of wisdom. Grant, O Lord, that the university you have raised up in Houston will remain committed to its mission to the glory of your blessed name. We ask this all through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Father. Before we launch into the kind of formal part of the evening, I did want to mention that my dear friend, Dr. Martin Lockard, has a birthday tonight. And in the spirit of conviviality, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Martin. Happy birthday to you. He'll get me back later, I'm sure. Thank you so much for coming. This evening is this year's instantiation of a tradition that we've had for a while now. This is the Archbishop Miller lecture, and I always feel awkward saying that when Archbishop Miller is in the room. I feel like I should say it's the U lecture. My name is Professor Tom Harmon. I'm Scanlon Foundation Chair and Professor of Theology here at UST. And of course, I'll introduce our speaker also in a moment, but I did want to first say a couple words about the Miller Lecture and Archbishop Miller so that he's thoroughly embarrassed. The Miller Lecture was established in Archbishop Miller's name by a generous grant from the Considine Foundation. So first of all, I'd like to thank the Considine Foundation most sincerely for making this evening's event possible. Archbishop J. Michael Miller was the 7th president of the University of St. Thomas, having previously served as the chair of the University of St. Thomas Department of Theology, dean of the School of Theology at St. Mary's Seminary, and as UST's vice president for academic affairs. Between his stint as VPAA and president, Archbishop Miller served for 5 years in the Vatican's Secretariat of State. During then Father Miller's tenure as president, he oversaw an expansion of UST's academic programs and student body, a renewed focus on the university's Catholic identity that included the founding of the Catholic Studies program, in which the Miller Lecture is located. Okay. And a successful capital campaign that funded the construction of Malloy Hall, Guinan Hall, and the Moran Center. In 2003, St. John Paul II raised him to the episcopacy and appointed him the secretary of the Vatican's Congregation for Education. In 2009, he was named Archbishop of Vancouver, British Columbia. He retired last year, and to our delight, moved back to Houston, and now resides at Keon House here on campus with the Basilian community. He currently serves on our board of directors. Many of the most distinctive endeavors at UST have their roots back in his tenure as president, including, I might say, in this for this audience, his move to place Ex Corde Ecclesiae and its American application document into the bylaws of the university, making St. John Paul II's vision for Catholic education the governing vision for the University of St. Thomas. So thank you, Archbishop Miller. I also want to introduce my friend Taylor Black. I will give you some boilerplate, really, and then maybe tease him a little bit. We'll see. So Taylor is a senior innovation leader at Microsoft, where he works in the office of CTO as Director of AI and Venture Ecosystems. He spent more than 2 decades at the intersection of technology, entrepreneurship, and higher education. He received both an MA in philosophy and a JD from Boston College, and received his BA in philosophy from Gonzaga University. And I mention those degrees because they'll be important later. He lives in Seattle with his wife, Anne, and their 4 children. And he's currently in formation toward diaconal ordination in the Byzantine Catholic Eparchy of Phoenix. And just received ordination to the subdiaconate a couple months ago, right? Yeah. Anyway, I met Taylor at college when his beard was shorter, but he still had some of the same interests. And back then, we always thought, who is this weird guy who is interested in about 6 dozen different things on the theoretical level, but also manages apartments while he's an undergraduate. He actually rented apartments to several of my friends at good rates. He was a good landlord. Brewed his own beer. No, he didn't do that. Never mind. Yeah, okay. And we both met our wives at Gonzaga, and we were both philosophy majors at Gonzaga. I have a lot of the same experiences. And so it's just a great joy for me to welcome him to the University of St. Thomas and to Houston.
It's a joy to be here. Thank you for having me, Tom.
Because the Catholic world is so small, of course, I bring Taylor to a Catholic campus, and he already knows several people among my friends as well. So that was a great pleasure also to realize that there were those connections. So our topic this evening is the not ambitious at all question, what has Silicon Valley to do with Jerusalem? And I wanted to ask Taylor that because I think he's particularly uniquely qualified to ruminate about it with us. And that's actually one thing I want to say at the outset is that we're going to have a conversation here, obviously. But when an appropriate moment in the conversation is reached, we'll want to open it up as well and to include y'all into it. So I anticipate that we'll have a lengthy and meaty I don't even want to call it a Q&A, just an inclusion of the rest of you in the conversation after an appropriate amount of time. So I just want to start out kind of cold and say, Taylor, what has Silicon Valley to do with Jerusalem?
And he gave me none of these questions in advance.
No.
So I think one of the interesting things that has brought me into the Catholic sphere even more, I mean, I've been Catholic for a very long time, but more in a professional context in the last couple of years, is that I have secular colleagues coming to me asking me what it means to be human as a result of this technology called artificial intelligence. I've been in tech for a very long time, and this is the first time that they have come to me with this question. And so it's strange in many ways to kind of have that Jerusalem sort of question come to one in the Silicon Valley sort of sphere. But I think that all of the tools that we have ever made as a species, as a culture, as children of God here, have affected us in a variety of different ways. A lot of them have kind of been external to us, where we're able to grab them with our hands and use them to build things like the Cathedral of Notre Dame, or the Hagia Sophia, or pen works like the Summa Theologia, or create many other different things. But all of those have kind of been external to us in some fashion, right? Where artificial intelligence, I think, really hits us in the core of our humanity in many ways, is that it seems to do the things that we thought were unique to us for a very long time, right? It's use of language. When I open a chatbot and have a conversation with something on the other side, the only other analog that I've ever had to that in my experience is with another human on the other side of that chatbot. And so it very much feels that there's this sort of this categorical difference in this new thing that we've discovered as a result of our God-given human ingenuity and our co-creative capacity granted to us by the Creator. But that has kind of brought a sort of sharp point to this question of how does this culture, this humanity that we've developed in the sphere of Jerusalem, in the spirit of Jerusalem, lo, these many millennia that we have kind of cultivated ourselves in that vein, to this very, very new sort of thing with gold and pickaxes and miners and silicon in that valley south of Seattle. And that, I think, ends up calling our understanding of what we developed as a culture, as a species, as a result of this new thing that now seems to be us in some fashion. That I think is the point here, and why it's raised so many questions, and why AI is an acronym all of us know now, rather than some obscure concept that was come up with in a conference in 1954, a bunch of computer scientists. So that's why we're here tonight, and unpacking that and what the meaning of that is and how we can grapple with it better.
So you said that this is really the first time that your colleagues have come to you with these sorts of questions. What do you think shifted?
I think there's three things, and I'm going to start with the most pragmatic, perhaps, and perhaps maybe the most pessimistic. It can do my job. It hits me not only in the heart, but in the wallet, and, well, sometimes the wallet ends up being more important than the heart. And so there's a piece of that. I've trained for many years, and I'm getting paid Silicon Valley pay, which is some of the best pay in the world. And it can do the thing that I can do. That's strange, number one. Number two, indeed, the example that I gave of having a conversation with something on the other side of a chat interface that can say all the right words, can follow my conversation, can include facts that I have given it over time, seems to simulate in every reasonable way, particularly if I have a unexamined anthropology, everything that I thought was unique to humans, what only humans could do. I have no other example of it in my own experience of anything other than a human being able to do that. And then three, particularly, I think if you work in the tech industry, a lot of kind of the society's experience of AI ends up being maybe a year, maybe two, sort of lagging what some of us in tech are seeing as the frontier of the technology. And so there's this feeling of even the society as a whole is starting to see the impact of this technology, and it's going to get even more like a human in many ways. And so where do I fit in this? I used to be able to assign a lot of meaning perhaps to my work. I used to be able to assign a lot of meaning to the fact that I could, text other people and manipulate language in a certain kind of way. And now those two things that I may have had as my unexamined core of my anthropology now aren't there. So where do I go now for understanding my anthropology to a deeper level, such that the meaning I used to take in these things can't be taken by a machine?
So I emphasized your academic background for a purpose, of course. Here we are at the University of St. Thomas. Our patron is Thomas Aquinas. We have a Center for Thomistic Studies, which awards a PhD in philosophy. Do you think that your philosophic background has helped you think through both some of the theoretical and the practical parts of that question, and how?
100%. In fact, I wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for that. But I think there's a small anecdote I'll apply to why I studied philosophy in the first place. I was a big lover of fantasy in high school. I read everything that Tolkien ever wrote. And there was a richness to the way in which he described the world and the experience of being in Middle-earth and in the larger world that he created that I didn't have a good explanation for in my own lived experience. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I spent a lot of time in the mountains and trees and rivers. I was homeschooled all the way to undergrad. And so I had a whole lot of ability to really soak in the world. But I didn't have an articulation of it that resonated as richly as Tolkien's own described articulation of Middle-earth. And so when I went to undergrad, and even in high school in many ways, I was looking for an understanding of a worldview that helped me understand my lived experience to that level of depth that Tolkien was able to create in his own fantasy. And I found that in philosophy, in a variety of different philosophers, and particularly in Thomistic thought itself. That's why right after undergrad, I went and got a master's in philosophy at Boston College. Boston College specifically because they focused on one of my favorite philosophers, Bernard Lonergan, who is very much in the Thomistic tradition. And those of you who debate that, I'm happy to debate that with you. But still, very much in the Thomistic tradition.
If you know, you know.
There we go. But where I rediscovered it, though, was when people were talking about this thing that did thinking. In the office of the CTO of Microsoft. I was already very well equipped to understand what thinking meant and how to articulate a human experience of what was happening inside one's head when one was a user of these particular products. And I think it was even a couple of months after ChatGPT came out, I, not a product manager, gave a talk at the product management conference internal to Microsoft about, in fact, it ended up being a keynote, surprisingly to me, explaining the cognitional activities that were happening when a user was interacting with an LLM or with a chatbot, because there was no actual anthropology to be able to do that from a user experience standpoint. Now, for those of you who might be new to tech or to product management, user experience is the way in which any technology is developed where they need to understand how the user is using the thing so that they're able to change the thing in response to how the user is using it. Well, LLMs are a very strange thing here. A bunch of what the user is doing and is happening inside one's head, and asking the user what's happening inside one's head is of difficult data to get. You're not even sure if the user is articulating what is happening inside their head very well. But the problem is that ends up being really important for developing these kinds of machines, because what response should I be giving back to them? Should I be suggesting this? Should I be suggesting that? Ends up being very problematic. And so all of a sudden there was all this intense scrutiny and trying to understand what is happening inside the user's head when they're using these kinds of tools. And of course, I had a sense. I had a very strong sense. I had my own kind of reflected understanding of what understanding was as a result of my education, as a result of my deeper study into philosophy in particular, and epistemology and theory of mind. And so it is able to lay out an architecture of this. This is how I think it works. Now, there's other philosophers in the space, in the tech space, who are also laying out different theories of mind that are coming from a variety of different places across the particularly American philosophical canon. But this one often resonated. This one tended to resonate, and it gave a lot of encouragement and ways of grounding the user's difference from the technology to the people building the technology themselves. And the astonishing thing to me was that it was entirely novel to nearly everybody that I was working with. Anyway, yeah. So that's
one weird thing about it is that we actually, we think a lot, but we seldom think about what it means to be thinking. And we do actually know things, but we seldom think about what it means to know. It occurs to me that I think that philosophy of mind has always been like really, really important and relevant and even practically relevant, but there's seldom been a point where it's been so obvious that it's relevant and practical and even urgent.
Very much so, but I'll remind the Thomas in the room, right, that actually the operations of our intellect is Thomas's only natural analog to the Trinity. And so in many ways, we should have been treating it as urgently, as importantly as Thomas did this whole time as well, right? If that's the only natural analog, should we not understand it better? Should we not also start tying in the ways in which our psychology, the ways in which our affect, our emotions, our own biology, noting things like the vagus nervous system, which is our largest nervous system, that goes throughout the entire body. 80% of the signal is inbound to the brain rather than the brain commanding the machine to do things. I think there's a whole lot of really interesting thought that we can continue to develop in all of the Catholic anthropological tradition in this vein. And we have people hungry for it now too, particularly from more materialistic backgrounds, from more trying to understand how we differ from machines. This is such a ripe opportunity where so many people are asking that question: what does it mean to be human? And we can go forward with that.
I was afraid this was going to happen. There's so many directions to go. I'm almost like paralyzed by the number of options. I really want to talk to you about Tolkien, but I'm going to restrain myself. Instead, so we'll actually come back to that. But instead, I'd like you to actually go deeper on what you're saying about this real crisis, right? That's been provoked by this new technology, and could you tell us a little bit about where you see the rubber hitting the road, and what are like the most urgent rubber hits the road questions that are being asked at work right now?
Yeah, certainly. I think I'll break these into kind of three different chunks. The first chunk is with regard to how we understand this concept of the human in the loop. The human in the loop is something used often in the technological kind of product building space of ensuring that whatever the LLM or the agent is doing has some human oversight of some kind. And I mean it in precisely that high level sort of way. Has some human oversight of some kind. Well, what kinds of tasks in your life are you comfortable with having some human oversight of some kind? Not very many, I would suggest, right? And so what we're discovering is that, yes, these tools are very powerful. Yes, these tools are very useful in a variety of different contexts, and the engineering around them is getting better and better all the time. But where are we comfortable with the kind of probabilistic outcome of the AI, of the LLM, of the multimedia model, being able to answer certain kinds of questions to a degree of accuracy that we're comfortable with? Now, for some kinds of things, actually, I would suggest that we're actually more comfortable with a rather larger range than we might have anticipated in the first place. My favorite example, of course, is of the Waymo autonomous driving cars. It's not that they have to be perfect, they just have to be actually better than the average driver, which all of us have a very strong opinion on with regard to how good the average driver actually should be, and actually is indeed. And it's rather lower than I think Waymo is actually capable of right now, right? And so there's this kind of feeling of humans should be involved in important decisions that the AI is making at all times. What kind of humans? What kind of formation? Are they just kind of hitting the button when the button needs to be hit? Are we sure from a design perspective that we're surfacing the right kinds of decisions for the human to be involved in the loop? All of that, there's a set of design questions there. There's a set of kind of human formation and HR questions there. But that ends up being one of the major ways in which technologists and technology companies are kind of inserting back in, like, the human has to be in charge in some fashion, and we have a broad concept of that needing to be the case, but not a great way of kind of tying it down into design principles, not a great way of kind of understanding human formation for that decision maker themselves. So that's kind of one perspective there. The second way in which we're seeing this and wrestling with it is the concept of agentic co-workers. Now, particularly if you're in tech, and this is where a lot of the introspection of the tech industry, because of developing these tools, and two, because a lot of their work is spent in front of a machine doing machine things, an agentic co-worker being a part of your team, being autonomous in some fashion, and nobody has any concerns that it is human or conscious or anything. So it's very much a tool in the context. But it's a tool that is increasingly being able to make a large set of decisions that I used to make low level, unimportant decisions, like the phrasing of a particular email in the business context where I don't need to, belabor every word perhaps. Or maybe even like the triaging of a certain ticket in developing a piece of software where I want the outcome to be achieved, but the means by which I may be a little bit more sanguine about. All of that sort of thing starts to parse away a bunch of the time I needed in order to do the stuff that I needed to do. Well, there's two ways of approaching that increase in time that I have. One is to be able to do more. And there's this amazing HBR article and very much a feeling across the entire tech community of AI isn't making us do less, it's actually making us work more and harder because we realize now we can 3, 7, 10x our productivity, and that's exhilarating. And as a result, like people are shifting to polyphasic sleep schedules so that they're able to keep the agent running and prompt it when it needs to be prompted. And we are seeing these massive productivity gains in a variety of different spaces. But it's unclear, one, that's sustainable, but two, how the entire workforce as a whole kind of responds to this. Do you have the number of people at your tech company? Do you hire more because now your productivity is 10x across most of your employees? It's a very strange time in terms of understanding how this actually impacts kind of work systems as a whole. The third, I think, question, and actually Microsoft's recently released study for the future of work addresses a lot of these questions in an empirical sort of way that I recommend to you. The third thing is the rapid pace and continued rapid pace that we are more or less certain of within the industry of this technology advancing. Advancing not in all of the sensationalistic sort of science fiction inspired sort of ways that the media will often lay across. One, because it's really boring to talk about how getting chips more efficient and algorithms more efficient improves certain kinds of things, and you have to science fictionify it to make it more interesting. But that sort of capability increase where there's almost a doubling every 7 months of the capabilities within these models, and the engineering around them, and the different kinds of models that are spinning out as a result. These aren't all LLMs. That continues to be kind of a concern within the tech ecosphere because we've already seen so much change. How can we anticipate the still massive trajectory that's to come?
Let me go back to something that you said in your first point about the importance of the human in the loop, but not quite being sure why. What's the real need for the human in the loop? So it seemed to me that you were moving in the direction of describing the importance of human formation. But what I love about the way these questions are emerging is that they're emerging out of sort of very kind of practical concerns implicit in the technology, and they're maybe forcing us to confront things that normally we don't want to confront for a variety of reasons, one of which is, what does it mean to be human? So let's get super philosophical and just take the bull by the horns. Like, what do you think makes us different? I mean, you talked at the beginning about colleagues who were experiencing kind of anxiety attacks, partially because they might lose their jobs, but I'm sure also partially because they think they might lose their jobs as human. So this is a theoretical concern, but also a kind of existential concern now as well. So help us out, Taylor. What makes us distinct from these things?
Well, right, and so the human in the loop ends up being a bunch of duct tape over needing somebody to be a good decision maker. There's a lot that makes somebody a good decision maker. In fact, I would say that implicit in being a good decision maker is actually having a good scale of values. right? I'm making a good decision because it's better for my dog. Yes, people are going to die, but it's better for my dog. Like, oh man, your scale of value is a little bit out of whack there, right? Or, but we can't talk about that necessarily. We need a human in the loop. So what's implicit in the human in the loop? I think there's a couple of different things from Catholic anthropology that helps us understand precisely what is needed in being able to make good decisions in systems that can operate at a massive amount of scale and at a massive speed, right? Right now, apologies to my, well, actually, no apologies to my insurance folks in the crowd. Insurance is a great way of saying, hey, we already have a really good understanding of what it means to be a good decision maker in certain contexts. In fact, we have a very dollar-tied understanding of that. In the same way, my legal friends in the crowd, we already have this amazing framework for understanding principal-agent relationships, so that agents are always, if they do work under the auspices of a principal, you can tie that back to the principal. In the context of being a decision maker in the loop here, we're duct taping it over a couple of things, and those things I think are not only the ability to make good decisions, which the business context already has a little bit of a mechanism for, right? You get promoted because you did good work. You get into management because you're able to lead people, and that kind of implicitly means in some ways that there's some good decision making in that context. But here you have an engineer who has an ability to change a huge amount as a result of the sledgehammer that they've been given as a result of having 10,000 agents do their bidding. Now, agents can go out and change things in the real world. They can buy things. They can do the work of other sets of humans, but that now they're doing it entirely autonomously under sets of systems that are leveled up to the single human in the loop, potentially, right? There's ways of engineering around this, but still, the human in the loop paradigm has given a much bigger surface area of effect for a single human decision maker. Well, now we have to worry about the decisions that humans making a little bit more. How do they do that? It's not a skills class I can send them to. I start to have to worry a little about the moral character. I have to worry about that scale of values. I have to worry about, are they asking the further pertinent questions that are necessary to make a fully informed decision in this context? That's a whole lot. We used to be able to do that from like a sort of political sort of way, like, oh yeah, well, that judge is a great judge because we can look at their career, or that engineer is a great engineer because they've developed a lot of code. But here it's not clear that there is a, show me the series of amazing judgments that you have made. But we're that precise in what we're requiring of the human in the loop, but it's not clear that we have a way of evaluating that outside of a moral intellectual tradition and a human anthropology. There may be kind of limited ways in which we're able to answer that, but right now that's the thing. And so how do you hire a person like, hey, is your scale of values right? Let's knock on your scale. You can't hire a person off the scale of values. Like, that's something you actually implicitly can't ask them, right? So how do you figure that out? How do you know that your human in the loop is going to make a good decision when it affects a huge layer of scale that we just haven't been able to really wrestle with before? We've dealt with this with regard to things like nuclear weapons, right? Or we've dealt with things like this where that one person making a decision is going to affect so many different people that we have some mechanisms for it. But we're entering an era and a period where that's going to be democratized to a level that we don't have a good sense of how to evaluate those individuals anymore.
Would you say this is one of the reasons why people might be more interested in those of us who are inheritors of a thicker tradition of moral decision making?
So yes, anecdotally, I was invited to, I think, 12 different conferences in Rome last year, about a quarter of which had anything to do with the Vatican. They were tech people having conferences in Rome because, and this is my own perspective, they'd never told me this, but it was like, we need some sort of like moral person to go have a conference next to, or somebody who can say something about human anthropology that we can't. I mean, even Peter Thiel a week or two ago had a series of closed-door conferences in Rome. on AI and the Antichrist, right? It's like, this is a very strange thing. Why do you need a conference in Rome in order to make things happen here, right? It's there is something there, right? And it's all of tech, and it's all of modern society. Kind of, wait a second, we built something a little too big for us, maybe. And so, how do we figure this out? And so, I'm talking to technologists all over who are saying things like they need to reform, retrain, fire and hire something around the orders of like 3/4 of their workforce, because they haven't had to think about this sort of aspect of human formation when it comes to being able to deal with tools that have impacts 100, 1,000, 100,000 times larger than they've had to worry about a single employee having impacts over before.
That little word alignment, that carries a lot of weight, doesn't it? I mean, what are we aligning with? I mean, does that become a thematic question for people in the industry?
Very much so. It's similar to human flourishing in many ways, right? It both beg the question: alignment to what? Well, to what's correct. What's correct? Quid est veritas. And it is very much begging the question. And I don't, in many ways, the way in which a lot of the tech industry has been approaching it so far is like going to law. Like, well, we're not going to break the law. Great as a baseline, right? We're also not going to we're going to make sure that our technology doesn't produce unflattering media of people who can sue us back. Okay, that's great too. We got to start from somewhere. But increasingly, right, as we understand the nuance of these tools, and as the legal frameworks and the insurance frameworks start to pick up speed too, it's like, wait a second, where does the onus for the ability for somebody to create a terrible image of some popular person, where does that land? Yes, definitely with the person who created it, but also where do we think about that in terms of an industry or as a society about where we want to allow people to use these tools. So to your point about alignment, of course they intend truth, right? That's the thing underlying alignment. That's what everybody wants it to kind of do, but we can't talk about that, or it becomes too complicated to talk about it, or we don't even know what we mean entirely when we're talking about it in the tech sort of sphere. And so alignment ends up being whatever the company, and most companies in the tech sphere are run by mostly people who are trying to do mostly good things for humanity, right? I don't see the whole industry as something to be demonized by any means, but it ends up being kind of a little bit company specific, as we've seen in recent headlines. In fact, like with regard to certain kinds of decisions around the tech sphere there. But I think everybody is starting to hit the alignment question. Everybody's starting to hit the human in the loop question. And everybody's starting to hit the human flourishing question too, of human flourishing too tries to pack in a whole lot there, or when really it raises further pertinent questions, right? What does it mean for a human to flourish? And there's a variety of different questions about answers to that over the last several thousand years. And 2 or 3 traditions have been a part of those for a very long time, which is why I think, going back to the anecdote of why so many AI conferences are happening in Rome, and it's not just the cuisine. I think it ends up being like what do we do? What do we do?
So when does the dam break? When do people just say, okay, well, we've tried not talking about truth for a while, and it's not working. Now we actually have to talk about truth.
I think it ends up operating on a much longer scale than we anticipate. All of us, talk about how fast the technology is moving, but of course that's never been the gating factor. We're always the gating factor. We work on gestational periods, not on technology advancement periods. There's a wisdom to the church's liturgical year, for example, in patterning this way in which we live around seasons rather than around microseconds. And I think it's going to take us as a culture and a longer time to figure out what all we mean by these different things. I think one of the reasons why alacrity is kind of pushed always in technological advancement sorts of ways, is that it is a way in which we're trying to understand what we ourselves have created. There's a lot of unknowns in what has been created, but what happens when we create tools like this, though, is that because of the unknowns, because of the unknown applications in particular, it kind of puts a fire under the intellects of everybody working with it, saying, what can we do with this? Unfortunately, of course, there's always, post-fall, there will always be bad actors who can utilize these technologies in terrible, terrible ways. And so there's a bit of an onus, I think, that the industry feels, that our nation feels, with regard to making sure that we're able to find the good ways, or the compensatory ways, before the bad guys find the bad ways to overcome us in some fashion. But as a result of that sort of praxis, the practical applications of this technology, I think it's even more important for the. I was speaking to somebody earlier at the reception, to maintain the Benedict option as a sort of way of seeing everything through this sort of whole context. One of my favorite science fiction novels is a novel called Canticle for Leibowitz, which has a very kind of long-term look at the effects of tech on humanity, and the way in which humanity, particularly guided by the Catholic Church, has seen this before, will see it again, and has no concerns over the overall trajectory of both the Church and humanity, because Christ is risen and we've already won. But until then, right, we as a church militant have to kind of continue to do the thinking necessary to help us understand this new thing that we've created as a humanity, as a species, as a culture, because we take a long time in doing that. We take a long time in understanding the impacts, the ramifications, as novel and cool as it can be. And as Pope Leo said at the Builders AI Forum last fall, which is part of our co-creative capacity given to us by our Creator in this context, right? We can do great good with this as well. But we have to figure out what that is, and we have to do it. We can't just let it be. We can't entirely all become monks and choose the Benedict option, although that's an important aspect of Catholicism, being able to do that. We also still have to go forth and baptize all nations, and kind of keep that intention. And it's hard, but that's, I think, part of what we're doing here tonight.
Right, yeah, sure. Okay, so let me push you back to the more theoretical question then. So the moral question is urgent, and I mean, as you kind of carefully alluded to, the political question and the kind of geopolitical question is kind of urgent as well. But it does seem to me that doesn't entirely explain the existential dread. It does seem like maybe someone might go up to, Mr. Black at work and say, Mr. Black, I'm working on this thing that I think is a better version of me. And I can't figure out why anyone should keep me around. I'm also a word machine, and I spit out outputs that look maybe not quite as good as what I'm seeing from our latest models. Can you tell me, give me some hope about who I am? How am I different from this thing? Am I worth it?
Yeah, well, and this is similar to kind of the anthropological question. If you have a really poor anthropology, then you can see these tools as being better than you. And indeed they are, if you conceive of yourself in that way. But it's a similar sort of problem when it comes to this, is that we've created a bunch of work and jobs which may not be the kind of work and jobs that we should have. I'll come up from my office in my basement after an 8-hour day, a 9-hour day of staring at a screen, and there's flowers blooming outside, and my 3-year-old's been muddy in the backyard while I've been doing that, and I'm not sure that's how I was supposed to be living, And so there's a certain sense in which this is a great opportunity for us to kind of re-examine the nature of work. And was the great phrase from Walker Percy, I wasn't meant for night sweats and work fevers. But and so there's a piece of that. Like, yeah, you may not be it may be able to do part of your job better than you, but maybe part of your job wasn't to be this, And so there's a certain rethinking of the nature of work that I think we could do there. There's also, though, a certain sense in which pieces of the way in which you can use a tool is indeed to do your work for you in ways that you shouldn't, right? For example, like having automating all of the emails that you need to send to people so that they end up being very generic and benign and don't actually address the relationship that you have with that other person, right? You're missing out on an aspect of what it means to be human as a result of that sort of automation. And this isn't novel to AI, right? There's all kinds of ways in which we can use tools. Actually, one of my favorites is that I've used as an example is getting a treadmill for your dog so that you don't have to take your dog on a walk. Like, I mean, why did you get the dog? Wasn't it to take it on a walk? Like, what a terrible use of technology. Yeah. And then there's a variety of different ways in which we succumb to our baser natures and use the thing to supplant the thing that actually was able to help us flourish. So I want to take that first as yes, it might be able to do your job, but maybe it was a job that wasn't helping you thrive as a human in all the ways that you could thrive as a human in the first place. There's a second layer here, though, too, where it's a use of the tool itself. So perhaps there were aspects of your job that really didn't improve your humanity and human flourishing in the first place. So what if you're able to, do the data validation of, thousands of rows of Excel, which is just, making sure the numbers look right. Now, there are certain kinds of people in the world where they thoroughly enjoy that, and it ends up being a really important piece in a particular part of the company. Awesome. There's other people who that's just not the case. And so there's places and pieces of work that can be automated in a variety of different ways. And Tom knows this too, but I hate driving. Driving seems to me like just a terrible use of human time.
I guess we're not going to recruit him to come live in Houston, guys. Sorry.
And so to me, like self-driving cars, this is great. I can actually have a conversation. And it's going to follow all the rules of the road, and I won't need to remember them. And so there's pieces, I think, of a reimagination of work, a reimagination of economy, where sure, yes, I know jobs are a job from a GDP sort of number, and yes, you need to put money on the table so that your children can have a good life and all of that sort of thing. But there's pieces of jobs that really suck. And maybe there are ways in which we can utilize this technology so that we can use a chainsaw instead of a crosscut saw, instead of an axe, instead of, so we can do the job a little bit better. Now that's technology can often take that in an asymptotic sort of way, in ways that aren't good, and it needs to be judged in a certain sort of way. And there's all kinds of drudge work, which I hate the tech use of that term, because a lot of drudge work taught me how to use my intellect in fantastic sorts of ways. And there's a balance there, but the use of the tools ends up being a really important thing there too. But then finally, with regard to the human person aspect of that question, right? It makes the knower, makes the human ask of themselves, why am I here? If my meaning as a result of why this tool being able to do my job has been shaken so much to its core, then what was I living for in the first place? What kinds of questions am I asking? Am I just going from home to work? How can I live more deeply as a human? And one of my favorite movies on this score is Joe versus the Volcano. And I recommend it to you all. It's a delightful Tom Hanks, Meg Ryan movie where he kind of has this understanding of wait a second, I was made for something more. And it gets him outside of himself. It has him thank God for his existence in even that secular vein of movie as a result of work just grinding him down to the point he's like, wait, this isn't what I was made for. And I had that opportunity, that sort of excitement, that being able to catch a colleague in that mode of thought, incredible, delightful, and I think we're experiencing that in unprecedented ways across all of our culture and society at the moment.
So it does seem to me that especially at this like relatively early stage in the technology. And you see this happen in history when there's emerging technologies also, that there just isn't very widespread understanding of the architecture of the technology. And so there's a lot of mistakes that people make about what it is that they then kind of import into their self-understanding, okay? So it does seem likely to me that some of the dread is just being unable to identify what it is that the technology is, and then disambiguating that from what I am. So I don't know how many people here actually understand the underlying architecture of the technology, but you do. Could you give us some insight into how the operations of the technology are different from our operations?
Yeah, certainly. And so this is I've iterated this a number of times, and so hopefully nobody goes to sleep, because there's a lot of math and statistics, which I know everybody in the audience loves and has a deep background in.
This is a multidisciplinary presentation.
It is indeed. But it ends up being a really important question. In fact, 2-3 weeks ago, I gave a talk on this at the Angelicum on as part of a broader philosophy and science sort of conversation, where it was a talk titled "How to Understand AI as for Philosophers and Theologians," and we got deep into how models are built, how they are able to, how they operate, and how they're able to work the magic that they work. And it's an incredible combination of a variety of different things. But let me kind of talk about 4 aspects of it, perhaps. The first was a paper that came out in 2017, which was called "Attention is All You Need." And it was a breakthrough in the understanding of mathematical algorithms that allowed a certain kind of AI architecture, or actually really a machine learning architecture called neural networks, to refocus, to re-put back into the computational cycles being run over a bunch of data, certain kinds of information from different time periods in the computational cycles. And so as a result of being able, this algorithmic breakthrough, we were able to see some massive gains of giving more and more information to this particular type of computer cycle. As a result of this, and the second sort of thing that happened at the same time, without which this wouldn't have been possible, was the massive increase of computer capability and capacity at the same time. This is why NVIDIA is at the top of the stock right now, is because they had a hardware breakthrough that happened at the same time as this algorithmic breakthrough. What this allowed us to do is, as we pushed more data into this machine learning model, it was able to gain better and better statistical understanding of that underlying data. Now, if we had fed it just any data, the alphabet 7 trillion times in a line, it wouldn't have found any intelligibility in that. But what we fed it, of course, was natural language, not just English, but basically everything humans have ever written, we fed into the machine. I can't help you really understand the amount of data that is. It's absolutely tremendous. But what this recursive algorithm is able to do is find all of the statistical patterns between any sort of pattern in the underlying data. What that means is that anything humans have ever written, we have a statistical model of the relationship between the words and chunks of words within that data set. The archetypal example of this, of course, is that the model statistically understands the concept of queen if you take away the concept of masculine from the concept of king. Because statistically, some sort of regal thing, some sort of authority, but it's a female authority instead of a male authority, well, that moves from king and it goes over to queen. That's a rather simple example from many years ago. What it's able to do now, though, in a concept called multidimensional space, is that it encodes all of this information into a variety of vectors. And as we know, vectors have a kind of a direction and magnitude. But in multidimensional space, it's not the same as kind of the physical space in which we're talking about. Multidimensional space can have like 144,000 different dimensions. And so what that means is that we have a statistical representation of all of the concepts, all of the language, all of the science, all of the anything that human endeavor has ever put into text, which is really interesting in a theoretical sort of way. What that's meant in a practical sort of way is that I can talk about, I can ask this LLM, oh, my mom died. And the LLM can say, oh, death. Death, okay, what are the concepts I know about death? But people do this thing called grieving. People think that it might have something to do with the afterlife. Anything that you can relate to the concept of death, it has a representational model as a result of all of our intelligible language that we pumped into the statistical engine. So it can talk about being sorry for me as a result of my mother dying, because it has a representation of all of those concepts together in its statistical space, in that multidimensional space. It doesn't have to feel any of these things. We've told it how to feel about all of those things as a result of all of the human writing that we've ever done, right? And so the intelligibility that we've given it as a result of the underlying corpus, all of our thinking that we've put down on our pages with blood, sweat, and tears, and deep thinking, and textbooks, and everything that has ever been written, and I mean that quite literally, everything that has ever been written, and at least the 20 largest languages in the world, is compressed into the statistical model in multidimensional space so that it's able to represent it in a really dense, rich way. It doesn't have to have all of these feelings. We had those feelings and we talked about them. And all it has is the statistical representation of these feelings within that multidimensional space context. So when we ask it questions, it doesn't have the, as Aquinas would say, the primary insight of being or understanding that something is real or something is true. It relies on the underlying data as already having done that and is able to remanipulate the secondary insight of formulation that all of us did when we wrote all of that text to provide a statistical representation of that secondary insight. The achievement from an engineering standpoint and a statistical modeling standpoint is astonishing. What we didn't expect and what ChatGPT 3.5 in the fall of 2021 showed us is like, it starts to sound human. It starts to feel human as a result of that massive computing capability. And we've had no other analog for this other than a human putting the words together. But now we've made a statistical representation of human putting words together at a degree that's so massive that its accuracy ends up being quite astonishingly phenomenal. You can ask it esoteric questions about things that you thought you only knew and could recombine. But of course, it has everything that has ever been written and can recombine anything in a statistical sort of way as well. It doesn't know whether it's right or not. That's something you still have to do, and actually it never will unless we also have an engineering capability of saying you have to bounce it off of this thing that we're calling true, and we tell it what is true, and it's able to do that sort of math there. But it feels that way. It's very seductive in that fashion. In fact, even our design interfaces are intended to simulate that sort of relationship, because how else do we do it? How else do we convey to us as the users of this technology as like, hey, you can talk with it in the same way that you talk with a human because it knows all of this stuff and can recombine it in a way that's convincing enough to you that you're able to have this kind of human-like experience as a result.
I don't know if any of the rest of you had this experience, but Taylor explaining producing statistical representations of patterns of concepts based on all of human output in history sounds very much like what I do.
It's true, but hopefully yours isn't just statistical, Tom. I hope you have, kind of the unrestricted God-given desire to know that is actually positing being when you make an insight, rather than it being like, it's probably okay.
Okay, so explain the difference. So there's where the rubber hits the road, right? I mean, and this ends up having massive implications for everything else that you've told us about alignment, about the importance of the human in the loop and judgment. So what is that difference when you come down to it?
Yeah, no, so this is one of my favorite topics. So, and I'm going to frame it a little bit in a famous analogy from the beginning of Bernard Lonergan's work, Insight. And Aquinas has the same concept, too, of this kind of God-given desire to know things, to seek the four transcendentals, the good, the true, the beautiful, and being with the capital B. And so this desire within us is the thing that kind of compels us to seek the truth and not be satisfied until we actually have that. What's fascinating is that you can make that development and that formational aspect of the human character be able to help somebody do that better, where they're able to kind of sit with the tension of inquiry longer and not give up just because it's hard, but continue on until they've actually found the truth. And the example that Lonergan gives at the beginning of Insight is the example of Archimedes discovering specific gravity as a result of needing to find whether this crown that the king has in Sicily is actually made of gold, but he can't destroy it, right?
Also another very urgent question politically. But
very much so. And if you don't figure it out, I will kill you. Great incentive, even better than a paycheck. And so he has this question, and he's thinking about this question. It's set the conditions for him patterning all of his experience around this particular kind of question, right? It's similar to the sort of question that many of us have encountered in a variety of different stages in our life, right? Before I asked my wife to marry me, I remember my experience being patterned in all sorts of different ways. Like, okay, I need to paying attention to this, because the kind of question that I was going to be asking sort of encompassed my whole being as a result of I needed to focus on that. What I did as a knowing subject as a result of that was started patterning my experience in ways that helped towards that end of being able to answer that question. And Archimedes did the same thing, right? He has the same sort of question in his mind when he was going about his daily life in Syracuse. And so when he sat in the bath and realized that when he sat in the bath, water spilled out, he knew that he could weigh himself, and he knew that he displaced a certain amount of water. And as a result, he understood the concept of specific gravity. So he was able to put the crown in the water, weigh the same amount of gold, and discover whether the crown was actually made entirely of gold or not. And knew it was right, knew that he was positing a understanding that he had about the world. So in so doing, in having that insight, he grasped being. That is with the big B, the one in which we live and move and have our being, right? And he was doing the same sort of thing there. When an LLM is coming to an answer for you, it is doing something entirely different. It doesn't have a question that it is seeking a truth for. It has a question that you've provided, right? And it is trying to solve that problem that is mathematized in service of a reward function and provide you the statistically closest answer to it. It has no idea whether it's right. It has no grasp of being or whether it is representational of reality in any way, shape, or form. It's giving you a statistical probability of the thing coming back as being correct, right? Now, to be fair, we ourselves do a fair amount of statistical reasoning ourselves. We may not be certain about a particular thing or understanding, but we're happy to move in that direction because it's good enough for us, right? And that works in most cases. Not in when I was proposing to my wife. I needed to grasp being in order to make that kind of question, right?
Like, yes,
very much so.
Yes, that's what you were looking for.
But in a variety of other contexts, like, well, is that the right direction to go to Safeway? Well, I kind of don't care enough to have the grasping of being about that decision, and I'm statistically, roughly that's good enough,
That's HEB for you Houstonians.
There we go. Yeah. Again, cars, me, it's just not great. Anyway, and so we have a statistical knowing aspect where we don't know the right answer, but we know the close enough answer, and we're comfortable deciding and acting, knowing that we don't have the correct answer in that particular vein. But that's an LLM. What an LLM does all the time. Now, to be fair, it can, because of, again, the math, all the data that it has, it can make very good statistical kinds of decisions, but it doesn't know that they're good.
I could have subtitled the talk, apparently, Lonerganians in Love. There are thank you. Okay, that was a pity laugh.
I'll convert you yet, Tom. I'll convert you yet.
I'm there, brother. All right, so I've got all sorts of questions that I could ask you. I mean, we've had Taylor's been with us for a couple days now. I've had so many fascinating conversations about a number of different topics. Obviously, one of the ones that's very urgent for us is what's going to happen to education. Okay, so that's actually maybe something for the next phase of our evening, because I see it's just past 8 o'clock now, and I would like to get y'all involved. We've been having a rich conversation. I hope that it's opened your eyes to some things, but I would love to get y'all involved a little bit now. And for that, Dorothea, would you mind? Yeah. So please raise hands. Is that Dr. Ryan Hecker? Yes. Hello. Okay. Yeah, him in the back. Yeah, good to see you. Dorothea. Oh. Middle.
Thank you. It's been a lovely discussion. So throughout your presentation, you've described how there needs to be a kind of sudden and inexplicable metanoia of technologists to recognize that there needs to be a kind of moral or spiritual order that they're lacking. And of course, I think most of us here would agree with that. But it seems that very largely, and for many generations, leading experts in technology and industry have been developing a radically anti-Christian, indeed anti-human philosophy that justifies the unlimited acceleration of technology. And you mentioned Peter Thiel's lecture in Rome, which I take was a deliberate conflict, an attempt to spark a conflict between the teachings of the church, specifically Pope Leo, in his January 2026 address on the World Communications Day, where he advocated human-centered regulation on artificial intelligence, and Peter Thiel's advocacy for unlimited technological acceleration. If this is the case, then it seems like there's not simply sort of going to be a sudden turn of heart by many of the technology theorists or advocates of industry. Rather, what's needed is a radical theological critique of why it is that we've come to believe that the technology ought to accelerate on its own behalf, contrary to all human ends. So how could we begin to develop such a theological critique, and what resources may we have in the Catholic tradition to do so?
No, it's a great question, and I think in some way there's a couple of three things I want to say to that with regard to kind of some spots of light in that vein. First off, in many ways, it's my own belief, and of course, I'm not expressing the view of my tech employer here. It's my own belief that I do have a law degree. I have to say something illegal at some point in time. It's my own belief that one of the reasons why tech has had a very anti-humanist and kind of impoverished notion of the human person has a little bit to do with the split between continental and analytic philosophy disciplines within the university many decades ago. As most, particularly because most analytic philosophy disciplines ended up in the computer science department as part of this too, which is a really interesting kind of overlap to me. And so that's just a musing there. Second, with regard to the tech industry as a whole kind of having those kinds of views, my feeling is kind of twofold there. One is we've seen really powerful, interesting development of technology that has had a lot of great impact as well as kind of mixed impact on humanity. But what I think technologists are continue to be super excited about is the energy and efficiency with which we're able to build things within that particular paradigm. And so there's a sense in which the mechanism is the thing that they're in love with, the way in which they're able to build rapidly and grow certain technological answers to certain kinds of questions that they appreciate and like more than anything particularly with regard to the understanding of the human person. And so that too is a bit of a caveat there. The third thing that I'll say though is that actually religion and a better understanding of the human person is making great inroads right now within technology. Last summer, Microsoft Research had a project entitled Technology for Religious Empowerment. Out of that research project came 6 design principles for designing AI for our religious-based customers in particular. The researchers who are part of that project presented their work to several of our internal business units, who immediately took up the suggestions with regard to the design principles in those contexts and have started implementing them across our stack. Additionally, and I find this fascinating, that a lot of the tech folks who posit kind of the transhumanist sort of vein of tech being able to solve everything in that end up being primarily, how shall I say this, individuals who have a bit of a cult about them, a cult of personality about them, rather than it being very representative of tech as a whole. Particularly tech outside of Silicon Valley and outside of a certain kind of founder mentality. And so I think that tech can often be kind of incorrectly categorized as a whole with regard to those particular folks with certain cults of personality about them, when tech as a whole actually doesn't operate that way, and two, ends up being very much more interested in being able to provide better solutions for a much broader set of customers than one might imagine. This isn't intended as a defense of tech. This is intended as a way of more appropriately utilizing the heuristic of generosity, understanding the underlying veins within this particular industry, so that we can better work with and evangelize them.
Oh boy, wow. Okay, Dr. Zimmerman, yes.
Thank you. I don't need it. It's okay.
Yes, you do, because it's being recorded.
Okay, sorry. I have to use technology. Okay. So first, I want to say that I admire your beard.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. But then, secondly, my question is, does becoming habituated to use AI make one less able to do the activities that are distinctly human? So there's a principle that we make the tools make us. There's the idea that Jean-Jacques Rousseau said that when we make new technology, we don't increase human power, but we decrease human power. And so Dr. Harmon had asked about reflections from teaching. So when I teach now, I try to get my students to read a text. I have them do in-class essays. They try to write and answer questions. And I worry that my students think that what I'm doing is something like asking them to walk, to Austin, right? And they're like, well, why don't I take a car, right? So that, doing things like sitting and reading a book, learning how to make your own judgment, grasping an insight, thinking of knowledge as being a human habit, that my students this isn't their experience, right? They think if I want to answer a question, I'll ask AI to do it. If I want to write a paper, I'll ask AI to do it. So my question is, does becoming habituated to using AI make one less able to do distinctly human activities?
Why would I do Bulgarian split squats when I could just use a forklift?
Exactly. Well, and actually, I was going to use a similar analogy. Human beings are the best distance-running animals on the planet, but I myself am not one of them at the moment, right? And so I've lost something as a result of this hated machine that I've referenced multiple times now of the vehicle, right? And so yes, if you utilize the tool to do your thing for you, then you lose the ability to do the thing. And in fact, this is a conversation that we've had many times over history, even in some of the dialogues. There was a concern about the writing replacing our memory, right? Yep, exactly, and actually that's a deep concern. In fact, even that specific concern remains a deep concern of mine. The phrase "you can look it up" is deeply concerning in many ways, right? Because you don't, as a result of being able to look it up, it doesn't mean that the phrase has entered your habituated pattern of experience. It doesn't come to mind when the situation that the phrase so aptly describes transpires in your own life, and so you don't necessarily have the precise words to say it. In fact, I may be one of the few technologists who's like, yes, you should still memorize vast swaths of things so it's there when you need it, rather than, oh yeah, I read something, I could probably look it up, but I don't have it ready to hand, to use a Heideggerian phrase. But So there is something that you lose. And so how do you use a tool so that it makes it harder for you? How do you use a tool so that it makes the intellectual activity that you're performing with it more difficult? Lifting weights, having the treadmill go at an incline, all that sort of thing, where technology is making us stronger as a result of it. I think there are varieties of ways in which the tool can do that. I have some articles I can share around that I myself have written on this score and how I use these tools myself. There's some simple examples of even switching things like ChatGPT into learning mode, where it won't give you the answer. It'll help you ask better questions in your path to trying to understand a particular kind of concept. There's similar sorts of things you can do in setting up the tools themselves so that you have to do more of the intellectual work, and that it leads you down paths that are adjacent, that aren't necessarily important for solving the question at hand, but may be helpful for understanding the broader context of the thing. Similar to things that one might do in the library, trying to find the right book to answer the question, and of course stumbling upon wonders that you hadn't conceived of in your search for that. But right now, particularly because we're still figuring out the design paradigms in the tech space, that's a intentional, laborious labor that you have to take on when you're working with the tool itself. There's ways in which, though, I see some silver lining to this, and there's a couple of studies out that show empirically how scientists, particularly good scientists, are using these tools in pursuit of their own scientific discovery, where it's helping them in tremendous ways that are participatory in their own human activity rather than replacing it. And so I'm hopeful for more of those paradigms to transpire. But right now, the design paradigms are set up to make that sort of replacement easy, often. This is a different kind of mode rather than the main mode you have to switch out of to get into the ones that make it more difficult. And that's a problem, and that's a concern, particularly for folks younger than undergraduates, folks who are, as I remind people, have a prefrontal lobe hardware problem in addition to their software problem. And so that's to be taken with a lot of care there, because it requires a tremendous amount of judgment in the context of a tool that isn't necessarily designed to help you thrive in that particular fashion.
Over on the left, gentleman in the second row. No, it's you. If you could introduce yourself also.
Oh, yeah, my name is Brandon. I'm an engineer. I just happened to catch a text from our friend here about this talk and decided to come. Going back to the beginning of talking about your colleagues who ask you about, what is it like, is this thing going to replace me? Do you ever think that if you would zoom out and look at like the wider take-up or uptake of, AI in industries, maybe that it's not really living up to the hype, right? Like you see articles written in business journals or New York Times and other places where it's like companies spending money on AI, yet not seeing any return. People getting laid off, well, not because AI replaced them, because consultants told their company to lay them off. And so if you just said, well, look, outside of all of the philosophical things, there's these really practical things going on out there that can show you, like AI is not really coming for your job yet, but just right, it's the proof is not even there. And I think a lot of it maybe is that when you're so wrapped up in it and the hype of it, that like maybe it's, you just need to go outside and look around and see like, okay, wait, it's actually not that bad once I look. And in an industry unrelated to AI, but heavily uses it, you can see that, like, okay, this is cool, but most of the people who are entirely depending on it are usually like the ones not doing their job as well as the ones who aren't. So,
no, for certain, and it's a great question, and I want to preface it, of course, with, and I'm forgetting who I should attribute this quote to, but something along the lines of, it's very difficult to get someone to understand something upon which the job relies. And so I take that myself, of course, right, in many ways. But I think there's two things to note with regard to kind of the adoption of AI. First is that it's actually very similar to innovation. And so I've been working in innovation for 20 years. And you can go to a company and do innovation in the company. And the CEO says, we did innovation in the company. And we did innovation in the company. And everybody's like, where's the innovation? And no innovation transpires, of course, because you didn't actually do the hard work of allocating the 15% of your budget to innovation and doing the hard work of changing the processes, doing the hard work of rebuilding teams, doing the hard work of ensuring that the little infant innovative effort that you're doing is given the sort of continued oxygen and TLC necessary for it to land the 3 to 5 to 7 years later in which the innovation actually operates, right? Most of the same sorts of things apply to AI, where it's not that giving everybody a license to Copilot or Gemini or what have you in your company makes it so they actually use it, or use it in productive ways, or use it in ways that actually drive the company forward. That indeed is a much more difficult and tremendous endeavor, where you actually have, rather than kind of sprinkling innovation or AI over the thing, you have to identify the concrete problems that you intend on solving. You have to reshape the teams. You have to provide the different reporting structures. Like it's a change management problem, I think, that we're really seeing. And that's been consistent enough in the AI space that I'm able to kind of apply a lot of the innovation parallels to it. And so that's my kind of immediate pragmatic answer with regard to, well, yes, you're not seeing a lot of ROI if you're doing it in that fashion. The second example, though, is the ones that do the hard work. Do end up seeing the tremendous gains within that vein. For example, we have multiple examples inside of Microsoft of an individual who has figured out how to utilize these tools very well, shipping a year's roadmap of a product team in about 8 weeks, to the same level of production capability that the product team would have needed in that particular context. Yes, that's a code paradigm, and the code paradigms end up being some of the lower level fruits in order to be able to achieve that. We've seen similar things, though, with the kind of release of things like Claude Cowork and those sorts of tools in the same sort of vein. And this gets back to an earlier point that I made with regard to us being kind of the slow ones in the change loop for the technology to actually land and that sort of thing. This isn't to say that I think, we're going to solve all the world's problems as a result, but there is a definite ROI as a result of bringing this technology in, but it takes work.
Does it, though, I mean, to bring it back out of the business context and into the context of the talk, I guess, does it maybe take a little bit of the onus off of how important the human in the loop is, right? We were saying how critical it is for their, morality and all these things, because, your surface area, that you can impact things has gotten so big. Well, it's well, yes, there's always examples of certain individuals who can do it, but still, for the most part, most people aren't that good at it. And so then maybe you don't have to worry about it so much. I don't know. Maybe to be somewhat hopeful.
Yeah, no, certainly. Where we're seeing the most outsized impacts actually are teams that grokked it together, not teams that understood it together.
Not to support that other company, right?
Yes, not that other company. The teams that do it together.
Sorry, Mr. Gates.
The only way, but that's only been possible within the last couple of months, because we haven't figured out how to have the tools talk to each other within a team context well yet. That is going to be the major unlock this particular year. And we're seeing it already with sets of teams, where it ends up being a fantastic interface for getting certain kinds of work done as a team and helping teams collaborate in different sorts of ways. And I don't want to paint this as a dark picture in terms of job loss or anything along those lines, because the companies that are really doing well at this see the untapped productivity potential as a way of acquiring new customers and getting new work done, rather than a cost-saving measure. I think the cost-saving measure ends up being a really short-term, limited sort of view of the whole situation, and that many of the companies in that sort of space are going to regret it. the reason for the short-term cost-saving measures almost always have nothing to do with AI, qua AI, has to do with the infrastructure compute build-out underneath that is massive. So yes, in some ways those layoffs are due to AI, but it's due to AI infrastructure build costs rather than productivity gains seen in the near term.
Take the white pill. Okay. Ms. Eberstadt.
Thank you so much, Taylor and Tom. This has been really fascinating. Taylor, wanted to ask you about what you were saying about the difference between positing being and kind of representing a statistical relationship between inputs and outputs, or words in general. So I completely take your point that LLMs currently don't grasp being, right? I understand that. But I'm wondering if you think that they conceivably could one day, and like for instance through RLHF or through some other kind of referential grounding to the extensional world, or maybe through some type of architectural breakthrough, maybe shifting towards world models. But yeah, kind of is there a world in which LLMs or other AI systems, not LLMs, could grasp being?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and this is an important kind of architectural point that you're making. Most of what we talk about when we talk about AI, but even in the context of this talk, ends up being primarily in the LLM or MMM sort of space, which is large language models or multimodal models, which are trained in this statistical sort of vein. There's all sorts of other disciplines within machine learning and data science, of course, though. And what you touch on in some ways is things like deterministic models, where we have great physics engines that understand how physics works and is able to represent physics in very accurate and tied to reality sorts of ways. As just one example, there are many others in the sciences, and world models are getting to even richer versions of those. The interesting thing about those and why, and you also reference architecture as well. As an example of how important architecture is, in fact, I think we could stop all model development today and still come out with massive, tremendous gains purely from architectural differences in how the model capabilities are being utilized, how they're being built and referenced. The interesting thing about this, though, is that even in all of the building of that, the architecture of that, what we're doing is we're encoding insight and grasping of being that humans have already had into the machines and saying, machines, this is being. And so me from my context as a knower, me from my ability to grasp being, is doing the telling of the machine that this is what that is. And so when even a statistical model or something that says, oh yeah, this is right, I bounced it off of the human reinforcement learning, it wasn't the machine grasping the reality there. It was our telling this is reality to the machine, and it bouncing off whatever it was trying to answer against that understanding of reality. It's not clear to me that there is any future point at which these machines will be able to do that, because to me that still remains a category difference. This also gets into more hairy problems like the problem of consciousness, where I myself don't actually have proof that you are conscious in any way, shape, or form, because I'm only able to analogize that through my own understanding of my own consciousness, and you appear to be able to do things similar to me in an apparatus similar to mine, and therefore I can kind of assume that you have that, but I have no direct proof of that myself, and it remains a hard problem, right? Because of that, I stay away. I steer away often from conversations about consciousness, but that category difference for me ends up being kind of the machine difference. The other interesting problem, of course, is that will we be able to tell? And that's to me is a fun thing to kind of muse about, but it's hard to do any actual work there in many ways. To as far as I'm concerned, being a little bit more pragmatic perhaps than theoretical. Because it's hard to prove. Great question, though.
We have time for only one more question, I'm afraid. Mrs. Clay.
Hi, thank you. A year or so ago, I was in a webinar with a family medicine doctor whose specialty is breastfeeding medicine. And she was really proud of herself because she was teaching Jim and I that not everybody who breastfeeds is a woman. Is it too late? Can this change happen? Like, can she do what she wanted to do? Or is it already too late because our culture is saying that? And is it possible for us to try to teach an anthropology consistent with a Catholic anthropology?
So I would, perhaps the best analogy for LLMs in this context is thinking about them as a library. There's a lot of stuff in the library that just isn't true. And it's still there. And there's certain things that we could do to kind of remove the untrue volumes. There's certain things we could do to kind of curate that in a different sort of way. Or there's certain ways in which we can think about access to or utilization of certain particular books that are espousing theories that we know to be incorrect as a culture, as a society, as a religion. And ensure that more minds that are still in an earlier stage of formation can kind of experience them at the appropriate stage when they're able to argue whether something is true or not on that context. So in some ways, the way in which we're going about solving that as a culture, as an industry, ends up being more along the lines of a gating sort of function rather than a trying to posit what truth is on that context. This gets a little bit to the question that Tom asked me with regard to alignment. There's a bunch of efforts across technology right now to kind of align the models into different modes of ways in which they respond to us with regard to accuracy. Alignment, of course, is the underlying question of alignment is begging the question of truth. And so there's a different number of different perspectives of what truth is with regard to alignment in this context. And so some models in that particular context will answer along Catholic anthropological lines. Some models will answer in a definitive sort of way that, of course, whatever somebody believes in that vein can be true. Other models will say, hey, this is an open question from a variety of different perspectives. Here are the different perspectives and what they believe about this. You can make your own decision about that. And so you can kind of see how there's a couple of different approaches that we could take that end up being important different approaches to take. We can know what is true, but it's also important to know what our neighbor might think is true, and in order to be able to work with them as the child of God that they are as well. And so I don't think there's a kind of a one-size-fits-all sort of response in this particular context because of that pastoral aspect, because of that ensuring that we're able to be in dialogue, and there some are better than others, and there's definitely a formational aspect that applies to that as well.
It does seem to me that, and yes, I said there was just going to be one more question, but I lied. No, I didn't lie. Brian's going to give me hell later. But it does seem to me that you can't ever really get away from the problem of judgment here, because the LLM can give you some really sophisticated answers, and it can also give you another really sophisticated answer that contradicts the one that just gave you, and it's got no conscience about it. And so doesn't that really just highlight the importance of actual formative education for people who are going to use the tool?
Oh, 100%. This is also why I think I'm still working out myself kind of use of these tools in the before undergrad sort of level, purely because prefrontal lobe and judgment are highly correlated. But yes, judgment ends up being a hugely important and vital part of this entire thing, because it can, as Mrs. Weasley says, right, never trust anything where you can't see where it keeps its brain, and this is the case here too, right? Especially with children, I think, where it can smell like everything, like a human on the other side of things, and technology. And anyway, I could go down a rabbit hole on that score. But yes, judgment ends up being a major piece of this. In fact, perhaps a useful way of thinking about this technology is when we go about knowing something, first we have to have some experience, some data that we have. We second come to the insight of a certain intelligibility that we grasp in that underlying data, which you can call understanding. Judgment is whether that understanding actually grasps being or not. I think I had an insight. Is that actually true? The judgment piece is the true piece, right? And then there's a decision or an action piece on that score too. Now that I have understood this as true, what must I do about that? And all kind of truth in that sense, patterns is incorporated into our own understanding of ourselves and the world, and we must act on it as a result. Now, I think these AI tools end up being super helpful at the experience level. They're able to repattern our experience in a variety of different ways, in the same way that we might be, manipulating a model of a molecule so that we're able to better understand its isometry, right? Or manipulate some things on a page so that, now we grasp the insight. AI is fantastic at that. No, give me another example. Give it to me from the perspective of Tom Harmon. Give it to me from the perspective of, Socrates. And it's giving us different ways of thinking about something so that we can come to an insight. The insight remains ours, right? But of course, the judgment layer, the positing of whether it's true or not, remains ours as well. It's one of the things that constitutes us as a human knower, as a human being. And even more so, now that I know that to be true, what must I do about it? Those other layers end up being very important. And we can have help along the way. We can go ask somebody that we appreciate their judgment on. Maybe we can even ask it's not a discrete step by discrete step too, right? It ends up being kind of a recursive cyclical loop that we do as human knowers, and asking questions about our own judgment or our own decisions and utilizing those tools in that aspect can be great as well. But we have to be circumspect about it.
It does, here I can get into both the editorializing and the advertising portion of the evening. I do think that this is the direction that education has to increasingly focus, is on forming people who make responsible and correct judgments of truth about things, because it's going to be impossible for us to avoid those sorts of judgments, given the technologies that are going to be available to everyone.
It is. In fact, industry is asking for it too. What is this human in the loop? It needs to be able to do these things, and my people can't quite do these things right now. Yeah, it's also why I'm doing what I'm doing at Catholic University of America.
I realized about halfway through the conversation that I'd forgotten to mention that the other thing that Taylor's doing right now is he's the founder of the Leonum Institute tell me the subtitle.
AI and emerging technologies.
At the Catholic University of America. And so he's actually deeply involved in thinking through what this might mean institutionally for education. Okay, so anyway, this is the end of our evening, though. I can't keep you any later. This has been a rich conversation, and I'm sure that everybody who's here is going to be thinking about these things for quite a while. And I know that I'll be talking about these things with my students and with my colleagues for a long time. But please help me thank Taylor for the richness of the conversation.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you very much for joining us this evening.